Now you've noticed there's the move has now become, Clay, the tepid, well, this is not entirely responsible. I am not super proud of Biden's handle. Like, they've sort of done a little bit of this, you know what I mean? But they're just hoping that the storm passes. I'm not so sure it's an easy thing for him to pass. Legally, they're going to make this thing go away for him. That I'm very confident of. But politically, this looks bad now. This has gone from like, oh, doesn't everyone make mistakes, to Joe Biden's a reckless clown. I'm trying to keep track of how many times they find classified information in Joe Biden's possession illegally, meaning at a place that is unsecured, just for all the libs in the media out there who they don't know the rules, they don't know the law, they don't like to read, they just want to kind of be on camera or put snarky stuff on Twitter. It's a huge violation of classified handling protocols. I thought it was 4. Clay, you think we're on 5 now, right? I actually can't even take it into you have to go back and look at the various iterations of this. There's also a new White House chief of staff incoming, which I think is interesting, who was the COVID czar under Biden. But let's start, if we can, with at what point is yet another batch of classified found? Remember, this is not willfully taken by a president, kept in secure storage under surveillance in one location. This is a non-president, vice president, who does not have declassification authority, taking this stuff home like he's reading Car and Driver over the weekend and literally leaving it in the garage. At what point does this become a true political liability? At what point is it no longer possible for them to keep the defense of all things Biden going?
I think it's there. And for people over the weekend, and I understand how you could miss it, because I when I saw it, I just kind of rolled my eyes. They have officially had to call in the Department of Justice. And what I would say, maybe we can get our friend Andrew McCarthy on later this week, because I'd be curious how he would analyze this. But my thought is, when you bring in the FBI and the Department of Justice, it's probably them saying, if you don't let us do this, we're going to have to go get a warrant and do this search on our own. And so they allowed it to happen with their attorneys still present. But yeah, Buck, this is now the 5th different time that they have had to announce that they have found classified documents. And remember when this began, my question for you was, it felt like a cluster, because every one of these drip, drip, drip stories is embarrassing. But if the White House had been able to control this and they had said, hey, we, in the wake of the Donald Trump incident, decided to undergo an exhaustive search of all of Joe Biden's private files and private papers, and we have found several different documents with classified markings on them and have turned them over to the National Archives. And they had told that story once. And they had said, hey, we looked at every possible residence, every possible location. We did a deep search for classified documents just to make sure that we were complying. It would have been a mess, but it wouldn't have been the mess that this has turned into. And Buck, you mentioned what I think is so significant here. They made a big argument, not only that Trump had these documents, but that they weren't secured. Do you remember the front page New York Times story? Within a few feet of where everyone partied, Donald Trump had classified documents, as if, and they had the map up to show people Mar-a-Lago and where the classified documents were and what a security risk it was. And you and I came on and we said, look, in order to move around the Mar-a-Lago property at all, you have to be wanded. You have to be vetted to even enter onto that property. When you come in, they want your name, they want your birth certificate, your driver's license number, everything else to even allow you access to that premises in the first place. And so when they initially reported these, they had all the Biden defenders come out and say, well, this is totally different. This is how you're supposed to handle it. And then they had the Corvette and the classified documents by it, and they've just continued this drip, drip, drip of incompetence. And in the process, I think they've cut a lot of people's legs off. And Buck, you mentioned the idea that Eric Adams might run as the mayor of New York City for president. Joe Manchin came out and said he might run for president. Now, that would be an easy way for him to potentially avoid having to run for re-election in West Virginia and make it look like his choice, because then he runs for president, and if he fails, which I think he would, at least that's kind of like him riding off into the sunset and declaring independence from the Democrats, however you want to classify it. But I think increasingly it's becoming likely that somebody with resources is going to challenge Biden. I would still be very surprised if Biden isn't going to run, but I think this classified document scandal, the decision by his chief of staff, who we talked about, Ron Klain, for a long time, to step down and no longer be managing this White House, it feels to me like Biden is adrift at sea a bit, and there is going to be a challenger, and I think that challenger may well emerge in the next month or two, and then we'll see how serious that challenge is going to be.
I also think it's noteworthy because we often say here on the show, Clay, that not only have they refused to punish the people who got COVID so wrong, and I just mean professionally, never mind whether there should be any sanctions beyond that, but, fired. Like, I think people should lose their jobs over being wrong and also horrifyingly wrong on all things COVID. But the incoming White House chief of staff, I want everyone to hear this. This is Jeff Zients. Is that how you say it?
I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. I was hoping you were going to know.
Yeah, I'd take a stab at it. Jeff Zients. This was him in December of 2021. This is not, ancient history. Here is him weighing in. He was the COVID czar for Biden, not a very prominent one in terms of the media coverage. And here he is letting you know what he thinks of, well, a lot of you. Play clip 1.
We are intent on not letting Omicron disrupt work and school for the vaccinated. We've done the right thing, and we will get through this. For the unvaccinated, you're looking at a winter of severe illness and death. For yourselves, your families, and the hospitals you may soon overwhelm.
For the unvaccinated, basically, you're all going to die, or you're going to kill people, and you're going to overwhelm hospitals, and you're monsters. This guy should be begging
This was the
to
guy. Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
No, I was just going to say, this was the guy who conveyed the winner of death argument, which is maybe the worst possible statement of all that Joe Biden put out. And like you said, he's getting promoted.
He is being elevated. So in case anyone's wondering what they do when they get everything wrong and they, by all objective standards, should be ashamed of themselves, it's promotion time in the Biden White House. That's how they operate over there, because he was a soldier for the cause of the left. And the fact that he said all this stuff that's obviously untrue and has never, how is it that no one in the press has pushed him on this? Why isn't he being asked at the first opportunity, hey, you said that hospitals will be overrun with the unvaccinated. In fact, the vaccination didn't stop hospital levels from going to exactly what they would have been without the vaccine. The thing didn't even work. So how about that? He's going to be White House chief of staff, which I would note, Clay, if Ron Klain was the de facto president or whatever people argue, does that mean that Jeff Zients, I believe I've been told is how you pronounce this, does that mean that Jeff is now the chief behind-the-scenes guy making decisions for Biden, who at this point, given the fact that there's classified in 5 different batches of this have now been found, okay? They're now thinking about looking, I believe, at the Rehoboth Beach House, right? Isn't that the latest on? It is tough to keep it all together because they keep saying, oh, we found it all, it's over. It's good, we're cooperating, but this is the last of it. 5 times? It's not the last of it.
And I wonder when the shift to, not only do we have to search all of Joe Biden's properties, this is where the Hunter Biden connection can come in. Because I wonder how long it's going to be till they say, okay, let's start to search some of the Biden family members who had access potentially to these classified documents. And I'll also note that unlike with the Trump investigation, where the FBI took all the photos of the classified documents arrayed on the floor, the FBI, to my knowledge, didn't take any pictures of the classified documents inside Joe Biden's house that they took possession of. So that propaganda aspect has not occurred. Also, we haven't had any leaks, really, about any of the details surrounding it. It didn't take very long for the Washington Post to come out and say, oh, these were extremely sensitive documents. They involved potentially the nuclear codes. Well, all we've gotten is kind of a generic sense. They said one involved Ukraine, Iran, and England, I think, on the initial Penn Biden document discovery. We haven't heard anything about the documents since.
Why would he bring these home? This is another question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering.
And how?
And if you did bring
they're
them
from
home,
the Senate, a lot of the senators, Buck, have said you could never take stuff out of the Senate and be able to get this, home.
Well, I mean, it's illegal, right? And so that's why you wonder, okay, even if Biden has a SCIF, a secure compartmented information facility, which is where you are allowed to have classified, and for example, the president goes to Camp David, like there's a SCIF at Camp David, right? I mean, when you're talking about that level of government official, there are places where they go outside of the standard, the White House, the Pentagon, where you can have classified information. But even if that were the case, why would he have left it? Or why would he have left those areas with this? There is clear, this is what I'm getting to, recklessness here. And I think that the way that they could honestly defend against the recklessness, I think the way they could do that would be to say that Biden is really old and has made some, and his cognition is challenged and was challenged even when he was vice president. But they can't make that argument because they're going to try to make this guy president for 4 more years. I think it's likely. And so they're left with what exactly? Now you've noticed there's the move has now become, Clay, the tepid, well, this is not entirely responsible. I am not super proud of Biden's handle. Like they've sort of done a little bit of this, you know what I mean? But they're just hoping that the storm passes. I'm not so sure it's an easy thing for him to pass. Legally, they're going to make this thing go away for him. That I'm very confident of. But politically, this looks bad now. This has gone from like, oh, doesn't everyone make mistakes, to Joe Biden's a reckless clown.
Yeah, and that's why I think he's going to have a challenger. Now, I'm not sure who that challenger is, who's going to step in the ring with him. But I think ultimately, Buck, when some of this data comes out, what we're going to see is that, for instance, the Senate classified documents were things that Joe Biden felt entitled to keep. In other words, almost memorabilia, in the same way that a lot of the dispute over what Trump kept seems to be rooted in, hey, this is my property, this is memorabilia from my time as president. The Kim Jong-un letters are a great example of that. He thought that those were his possession. And I think that you're going to find out that Joe Biden had a very similar way of thinking. That's the only thing that can make sense to me about how he could end up with classified documents from all the way back to his Senate career. And then you have to wonder, how did he travel with these? Was he carrying them on the train, in his briefcase back up to Delaware, which is the usual way that Joe Biden would have traveled? How did the vice president makes a little bit more sense because they're packing up the office in a hurry. The Senate classified documents, to me, is much more challenging to explain away. And again, to me, it emboldens somebody who could be a challenger, whether it's Joe Manchin, whether it's Eric Adams. He might get challenged on both flanks, Buck, which would be interesting. I mean, Joe Manchin has a more middle of the road.
Right. Well, when was the last time we had a real challenge to an incumbent president from his own party, Clay? You got to go back.
I mean, I think you'd almost have to go back to George H.W. Bush, right? I mean, when he got challenged by Pat Buchanan back in 1988, I think it was, if I remember correctly. So it's been, or I guess it would have been 92 after he'd won his first term.
I just wanted to circle it back for a moment here. Circle back to some very basic questions about round number 5 here for the Biden classified documents finding. Remember, they went to Mar-a-Lago and they were able to get all the stuff that they said they needed to get, that they had been talking to Trump about for months, that he was the president when he took it and says that he declassified it. So when they keep saying, oh, it's so different, the oh, it's so different comparison is actually breaking in a direction that is far worse for Biden the more we know about this, right? So that argument's falling down. But even, Clay, how many classified documents have been found? That should be pretty easy, right? They should know. How many pieces of paper with the classification marking on top do you have? Here is a Biden spokesperson saying, it's a little bit complicated. Play 2.
Can you give us a sense of how many classified documents we are now talking about total across all 3 locations?
Sure. It's a good question. And actually, the answer to it is a little bit complicated because of this point that I'm making about the integrity of an ongoing Justice Department investigation. The Justice Department is going to be looking at all sorts of questions like that throughout their investigation. We want to be very, very careful to be respectful of the integrity of that investigation, to not speak too much about the underlying contents and materials, especially things that we may not know all the answers to.
Okay, Clay, I love this. By the way, whenever your spokesperson keeps shouting integrity, it's like Frank the Tank in Old School in the locker room. You got to keep your composure as he's in his tighty whities and throwing the chair around in the locker room. Like, repeating integrity over and over again doesn't actually sound good, doesn't make you think that that's what's going on here. But it's also the ongoing investigation point. How many classified pieces of paper have they found? It's actually not that complicated. It's about as straightforward as it gets.
Yeah, and we're going to have, I think Karine Jean-Pierre, unless they've changed the time, is going to get absolutely filleted in about 25 minutes. That's not necessarily different than normal, except, as we've talked about, the White House press corps will basically accept anything when it comes to a Democrat administration, except humiliating them and making them look embarrassed in public. And remember, when we last saw Karine Jean-Pierre, she said they've got all the documents. There are no more outstanding classified documents. And then on Saturday, boom, comes the report that they actually have found more and the FBI did this investigation. Let me just point this out, Buck. Why didn't we get a photo of all of the classified documents that they found at Joe Biden's private residence arrayed on the carpet like we did from inside of Mar-a-Lago? If the FBI is conducting the investigation, and that's important for purposes of the investigation, did they not take the photos? Are they not going to leak them? Why don't we have that imagery in the same way that we did with Mar-a-Lago?
Yeah, I want a photo, with some decent lighting so I can really see as much as I can. They can black out the classified lines. But I just want to see, was this next to some old baseball mitts in the garage? Some spray paint cans, maybe a rusty saw? Like, where were these classified documents? And I know it seems like this is maybe a little petty and we're obviously making some fun of it, but notice that the FBI produced this so quickly because it was meant to give a visual to the, oh, look what Trump did. Oh, Trump is so awful. He's such a bad man. Look at all the classified across the floor. I think the classified in the garage next to the Biden Corvette, I think that'd be a pretty interesting photo for us to see, too. And we know it exists somewhere, so why can't we see it?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, if you got the 1967 Corvette, maybe they could put them on the hood of the Corvette, because I bet they would have done that if it was Trump. I bet they would have arrayed those classified documents literally on the front hood of that 1967 Corvette just to convey how much of a lack of security was involved here. And this is where the other story continues, Buck. I want to keep hammering on this. They made such a massive deal about how little security there was surrounding all of these Trump documents, that it was such a national security risk that for the first time in the history of our republic, they had to bring in FBI agents to acquire all of these classified documents. And that was even though, Buck, this was in a storage area with a lock on it, with a video camera looking at the stored area. All of that security existed. And they said that was unacceptable. They ran all these stories, as we mentioned. New York Times has got the diagram, literally the diagram of, and I think the headline was like, close to where everybody partied lay all these classified documents.
Clay, we were going into Grassy Knoll and the second shooter theory territory with a bunch of dusty papers in the basement of Mar-a-Lago that were under lock and key. They went nuts with this. And I mean, you're totally right. They made such a huge deal of it. And I would just point out on the other side, this is the same advisor, actually. This is cut 3. This guy, Ian Sams, is saying, look, we've handled everything the right way. We're doing it. We're keeping our composure. Play 3.
So from the very beginning, when the team first discovered materials, they've handled this the right way. They've handled it responsibly with the proper authorities, first with the National Archives, then with the Department of Justice. And that may be a contrast to what we've seen in the last few years, but this is a president who believes in the rule of law, a president who understands the importance of an independent Justice Department. And so he's giving them access to the information they need need to conduct a thorough review, and the DOJ at the end of this review will be able to present the full set of facts.
For a sitting president to allow the process to happen here after all the screw-ups that he did doesn't mean that you get a big pat on the back and, a milkshake for being such a good guy. This is absurd. What's the alternative, Clay? They keep bringing up, handled it the right way. What's Biden going to say? Oh, we're going to take them off of this? We're not going to allow them to actually investigate? I mean, they have to keep the veneer of a DOJ that enforces the law going. I just think it's funny. They're acting like, oh, we should think this is all fine because of how Biden has responded to all the screw-ups that he created?
Well, I mean, Buck, just think about the optics here. On Friday, I believe, because we kind of had some fun with this, Biden went to his beach house, and he said he had no regrets. And he also said there is no there. And then the next morning, they announced that they found more classified documents. And just from a Biden perspective, they knew that they were in the middle of a 12 to 13-hour search of his residence in Wilmington, his main primary residence, not the beach house, although certainly they have to investigate, I would think, the beach house as well at this point. And I also wonder, Buck, it just makes Biden look so incompetent. I also wonder whether we're going to get that connection to Hunter Biden, because this goes to who actually had access to Joe Biden's house. Remember, this is stuff that he kept for years. We still don't know what it is, but how many people could have had access to this? And when are we going to get that guest registry, that guest log of all the people who came in and out of Wilmington? That seems like a pretty big deal at this point. And how many people had access to that garage? We know they were filming campaign commercials of Biden driving that 1967 Corvette where you can literally look over his shoulder and potentially see where the classified documents were being stored in his garage. We know Hunter had access to that garage. Does this involve Ukraine? Does it involve Russia? Do we feel like Hunter might have been running around rummaging in things? I mean, I wouldn't put anything past him after all of the things that he recorded on that laptop of illegal behavior. So I just think it starts to draw it together.
Here's Senator Tim Kaine, who is a Democrat, a Virginia Democrat, and he's even saying, yeah, this seems kind of weird, the whole taking classified material home. Play clip 5.
How does a senator accidentally take classified material home?
Margaret, I don't really know the answer to that question because I review classified material as a senator on the Armed Services and Foreign Relations committees. But when I do it, it's always in a classified facility where I don't have access to the materials other than to sit there and read them. So that's why there needs to be this independent investigation.
Okay. Accidentally taking it home one time, depending on who you are and what you're doing. I don't lie like Democrats do about these things, depending on whose team it is. That can happen. That has happened to people. Five different batches of it, though. That's systemic, Clay. That's a guy who just figured the rules don't apply to him. He can do whatever he wants. He's important. He's got a cool Corvette. He wears aviators, and his name is Joe Biden. I mean, when you look at this, this is a pattern. This is not a thing that happened once, and I think that means we all have to look at, there's only a few explanations here. Biden thinks the law doesn't apply to him, or he's had senior moments a lot earlier than we realized.
Well, it also, you, I think, agree with me on this, just continues to dunk all over the idea that the classified document scandal with Trump was in some way going to disqualify Trump from running for office or going to lead to charges. And I think Biden's incompetence, increasingly, Buck, is so incompetent that it's going to make it harder for the Department of Justice to bring charges against Trump for anything, right? Even if you accept, which I do, that there's a one-track investigation into January 6th and another track investigation into classified documents, and we'll see whether or not there's any overlap there. But if Biden is so incompetent that all of this continues to rain down upon him, I think it actually makes it way harder to charge Trump if Biden is running. Now, if Biden were to tap out and say, hey, I'm too old, 82 is too old to be running for president, then maybe the charges could come against Trump. But I don't think if he's running, they could ever do that.
They're not charging Trump on documents anymore.
Clearly not documents, but I
mean,
think this is so bad it may start to implicate whether they can charge him on Jan 6.
Oh, I see what you're saying. It might take down the whole takedown Trump operation. And you can sense among a lot of Democrats, I'm telling you, I understand people thought this was some plot from within to remove Joe. No, I just think he's an idiot, folks. I think Joe Biden's a moron. I think he's been a moron for the last 40 years, and they didn't expect this one. They got this one, and they can't make it go away. I'm not saying this may not be used to push him out, but the notion that this was orchestrated from the inside, sometimes it's not a conspiracy. Sometimes it's just a dumbass.
Yeah, that's well said. Very well said. And again, I just come back to, Buck, they wouldn't have had 5 different stories of classified documents if the Biden people had been well organized. They would have had one, they would have announced all of them, and they would have put this story to bed all at once, as opposed to the drip, drip, drip of absurdity, which I think is going to lead to Karine Jean-Pierre getting filleted even worse. I'm actually kind of looking forward to seeing the press briefing today.